everyone. So moving over to video number 2 now. One other thing I wanted to mention is that I am currently trying to get an assessment on the NHS, although it will probably take years upon years upon years, which I don't mind as long as I would like to be. I have asked to be put forward for an assessment to see if I might have dyspraxia or not. My dad sent a letter to the GP about that, but way back in January, although we didn't hear anything back, so my dad's had to send a letter again to the GP to ask if that's happening, because apparently you can get it on the NHS, like you can for autism, although with autism, obviously the process is a lot more straightforward because there's a very clear pathway for autism. I think it's called Developmental Coordination Disorder now, DCD, and I think you can get assessed for it on the NHS if you prove there's a case for why you want to be assessed. I don't quite understand these things because, like, for ADHD, for example, I don't have ADHD, but quite a lot of autistic people do. I think there's something like over 50% or something, where over 50% of autistic people also have ADHD as well. I don't have ADHD, at least I'm pretty certain I don't. That's not to say I don't have traits. I think most autistic people have traits. And my cousin has ADHD, which is interesting. And there is clearly some overlap between autism and ADHD, and a lot of autistic people have it. There seems to be quite a high proportion who do. I do wonder whether ADHD is one of these conditions that maybe is slightly overdiagnosed, because it seems that pretty much every single autistic person gets an ADHD assessment. And it also seems to be comparatively easy to get an ADHD assessment, although it does depend where you live in a country. Like, there's one person at a group I go to who's recently gone to his GP for an assessment for it, and he's been told you'll have to wait for about 3 years, but then lots of people at the women's group I go to seem to be diagnosed within a couple of months after asking for an assessment, so I don't quite understand that. But for developmental coordination disorder, it seems to be a lot harder, and I do not understand why, because it's just as serious as ADHD, and lots of autistic people also have it, and also might want to know if they have it. If you ask me personally, by the way, this might tie in a bit to one of your video requests, but I don't mind mentioning it now about what I do what would I want the government to do for people with autism. Well, one of the things is that when an autistic person is being diagnosed with their autism, I feel they should also be assessed for all of these other conditions during that assessment, because it would be so much more cost effective and help the person so much more if they could have like a full assessment of all the other potential neurodevelopmental conditions they might have, because autism pretty much never goes on its own. I know for a fact I don't just have autism. I've got loads of learning difficulties and stuff, and that's why I'm wondering if I might also have dyspraxia. But obviously when I was at school, I was just told I had motor difficulties and basically other stuff that was an endless list. Severe spatial difficulties, things like that. Executive functioning really bad. Obviously this could just be autism, but I'm just interested to know basically if there's something else going on. What was I saying? God, it's gone from my head now. No, what I was saying is that autism pretty much never occurs on its own, okay? Obviously, if you think about the autism criteria, the criteria for autism is essentially the social stuff, so that would basically be social communication and social interactions. That explains your difficulties making and keeping friends, your difficulties understanding body language, your difficulties with eye contact, difficulties knowing what to talk about, difficulties with emotional reciprocity, theory of mind, and also rigid and repetitive behaviours, which is the other key aspect of autism which you have to be autistic, which includes things like a need for routine, very strong obsessive interests, maybe repetitive movements and things like that. any one of those, basically. Obviously, all autistic people are different, so some autistic people might just have a strong interest, others might have routines, others might have repetitive movements, and some might have all of them. But at least one of those will be there if you're autistic. So that basically, and also I think in some criteria they also do include motor difficulties, I think, but not in all criteria. And that's because most autistic people do have at least some motor problems. In actual fact, I would say that pretty much every single autistic person has at least some dyspraxic element. It would be very rare for an autistic person not to. It's kind of part of the picture. I was really late to tie my shoelaces, for example, and had other things like that going on. It seems to be quite common, but there is a very high overlap, like I say, between autism and motor difficulties, just as there is a very high overlap between autism and ADHD. But obviously, not all autistic people will have ADHD, and not all autistic people will have, say, developmental coordination disorder. Though pretty much every autistic person will at least have some traits. So like I said, I do feel they should assess all of these conditions when they're assessing a person for autism, because what happens currently is that a person gets assessed for autism. It's almost like in a silo. You get assessed for autism, which covers those problems I mentioned, the social and repetitive behaviours. But then the person may well have other issues, learning difficulties maybe, and things like that. I don't know, dyscalculia, maybe dyslexia, dyspraxia, all those ADHD, all those other things that have a very high comorbidity with autism. The person may well have at least one of those other conditions, but yet not get adequately assessed for them because they just focus on the autism. Again, the person still feels a little bit like they haven't properly been understood because they think, well, hang on, this is explained for autism, again, what about this? And they're still left wondering. So it would be kind of like really helpful if the person could be assessed for all of those other things alongside the autism when they're given their autism assessment, which currently does not happen. So then people later on will often want to go and find out about these other conditions. And with ADHD, it's comparatively easy. It's not easy. It just seems to be like, I say comparatively easy because based upon a women's group I go to, where pretty much it seems, I don't know, over 50% of the women at the group I go to seem to have been diagnosed with ADHD, and the ones who've gone to be and that's a lot. And those who have been diagnosed with ADHD, it seems like they've been diagnosed within only a couple of months of going for an assessment. Although, like I said, a man at the other group I go to who's recently gone to ask for an ADHD assessment has been told you'll have to wait 3 years. So it seems highly variable. Yet another person I know was diagnosed by a psychiatrist in only half an hour. And his psychiatrist just gave him a diagnosis like that, which is a bit, So yeah, it does seem to be very much like a post lottery. But anyway, with regard to the possible DCD, and if I do have it, I suspect it's fairly mild, and well compensated for. It just would explain part of my history and part of some of my ongoing issues, which are more, more evident when I'm working under speed, or when, like, for example, I was doing voluntary work, and for example, my issues, this is why I sometimes suspect I might have a slight form of it, is that I can't fold sheets, I really struggle to make my bed, it takes me way longer than a normal person, and it's really tiring. I basically have, like, really bad spatial awareness problems. Anything under speed, like when I was volunteered at AGK, people often got very frustrated because I didn't wrap things up properly, or I put things in the wrong place, or I couldn't find things even though I'd been in the shop for like a really long time. And like when I was at school, I was actually taking out classes for coordination exercises in year 6, and I had to like throw bean bags and stuff into hoops because I struggled with things like that. So yeah, so I have quite a history of like various motor issues in various areas. And that's not to say I can't do motor activities, I've learned how to knit, things like that. It's just that, obviously, if I'm working under speed, or, I'm having to multitask and do lots of things, I get really flustered, and my spatial skills are absolutely atrocious. And that kind of ties in a bit with executive functioning as well. I do have really severe executive functioning problems, which is part of the reason why I struggle so much at school. This ties in also with the autism traits, so it's like a continuation from that video. But when I was at school, I have really severe executive functioning problems. Obviously at the time they weren't described as that, they just said I had really severe organisation problems. Basically, I would just dump things everywhere, extremely messy. I never knew where to put things, just dumped things everywhere. Also, Also, my mum basically did my homework for me. I know you're not really supposed to admit this, but literally I did not know how to write essays until I was about, I learned eventually, and obviously I went to university, so eventually obviously I did learn, but it just took me a really, really long time. And throughout secondary school, my mum would basically spoon feed me the information. I didn't know how to write essays, I didn't know how to put the stuff I'd learned into a coherent format. So my mum would basically tell me what to write and I'd write it out. And we do this every day when she came back from work at the same time. Otherwise, if I didn't have a parent doing that, I would not do my homework. I had no idea how to do it. Obviously, though, this probably meant that teachers didn't realise how bad my issues were, because I had to go to learning support in year 7 and in year 8. And basically, they were monitoring things like organisation, because those were the things that primary school had said was an issue. Organisation, maths and comprehension. But because my mum basically packed my bag for me every day and ensured things were neat and tidy, obviously it looked like I was doing okay. So it was like, oh, she's improving, tick that box. Obviously I didn't really speak to my mum to find out that actually it was my mum who was doing it all for me. And if I didn't have parents like that, I think my issues would have been far more obvious. That's why it can sometimes be a double-edged sword, your parents doing so much for you, because it can mean you could get by in school more without teachers kind of, getting under your skin, so to speak, but it can also mean that your issues are kind of camouflaged because your parents are basically doing everything for you. And it's often then when your parents stop doing things for you that people then start to think, okay, this person's actually got far more issues, but it was only because their parents were basically doing everything for them that it made it look like they weren't too bad, sort of thing. So executive functioning, really bad at school. I really struggled with learning at school. I couldn't do homework without parental supervision, basically, without my parents essentially telling me what to write. Without my parents helping me so much with exams and stuff, there's no way I would have got the grades I did. There's just no way. Eventually, like I said, I did learn, and by the time I came onto my A-levels, I had learned by that point how to write essays, because eventually what happens is your parents tell you how to write it. Eventually, I work it out. It's like, putting together a pattern. You have to constantly repeat your parents telling you what to write. Eventually, oh, this is how you write an essay. It eventually came. Again, I actually got very good at it, which is quite interesting. So I went from not being able to write essays at all to eventually being able to write pretty good essays. People often are a bit surprised when I tell them that, because they're like, well, you can write good essays. Yes, now I can. But what they don't realise is how long it took to get to that point. I didn't get there like most normal kids did. It took a really, really, really long time. And obviously also when I was at university, and I didn't do halls, I couldn't manage halls, I stayed at home. If I'd done halls, I wouldn't have been able to get a grade, because, multitasking can't do. I was at home, my parents literally did everything for me. So by that point I'd learned how to write essays, and I'd learned how to do the actual academic stuff, and I did the university work all on my own. My parents weren't helping me at that point, and by the way, I got just 2 marks below a first. So, and that was all my own work. All those years, my parents helping me at school and doing homework for me had by that point paid off. And if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have gone to university. So, basically, my mum was doing all the cooking for me, all the organising, everything, so I could just focus 100% on the writing the essays, and that's literally all I would do. I didn't go out, I didn't see anyone. That's what I did 24/7, was basically work on my university work. It was full on, because it took so much time and effort to do it. I couldn't do anything else. It took me way longer to write an essay than your average person. Some people could just write an essay in a day or something. I couldn't. I'd have to it would take me, a really, really long time to get it all together. That's why I got such a good grade, because I literally did nothing else. Just 100% focusing on what I was doing. Executive functioning is a big issue. And if I'm focusing on something and I'm just doing that one thing, and I can do something very well, and I can learn how to do things. It might take me longer, but I can learn things, and I can get there, and I can do a good job of things. But if I'm expected to do lots of other things on top of that, if I'm expected to multitask, if I'm expected to organise, can't do it. I can't work to speed. My processing speed is really, really, really delayed, or really slow. as was measured during the cognitive assessment. My working memory is pretty crap as well, so again, all of that feeds into the executive functioning problems. But yeah, if you've got any questions about this, do let me know, and thank you for watching.